So we've got a simple example here, a controller with two scope variables, one called message and one called touch. Looking at the HTML, we are just printing out the message scope variable in a h1 tag. And I have a simple button at the bottom which just increments the value of touch by 1. We've also added a setTimeout function. That's not an Angular function, it's a core part of JavaScript. Specifically for our example, it's external to Angular. Now what we expect to happen here is after 1 second, the setTimeout function gets called that we passed in, and we change the scope.message to world. So let's preview that. Refresh. So you can see in the console setTimeout was called, but we're still printing hello. I should expect that to say world now. To understand why, we need to dig a little bit deeper into Angular. This isn't going to be an exhaustive explanation because this is just a quick overview lesson. So far, we've just taken as fact this awesome data binding feature of Angular. The way it knows to update the view when the model, i.e. the variables on the scope, changes. But it's not magic, it's actually pretty simple. Up to this point, every time we've updated the scope, it's been in response to some Angular function, either an ng-click or a callback from an Angular service. But essentially, Angular knows every time something that might have changed some scope was ran. And if something got called which might have changed a scope variable, then Angular starts what's called a digest cycle. In a digest cycle, it just asks itself, has anything else changed since I last ran the digest cycle? If it detects that anything has changed, it just fires any event listeners or updates the view accordingly. But since setTimeout is outside of Angular, Angular has no idea the scope was changed and doesn't trigger a digest cycle. But look what happens when I click the button. If you remember, when we click the button, what we're doing is we're incrementing the scope variable of touch, and we're doing that through an ng-click. It's inside of Angular, so then Angular knows that something might have changed the scope. It runs the digest loop, and since we did change the message in the setTimeout, the message is updated as well. So how we solve this is by wrapping external callbacks, external functions that are outside of Angular, in a scope.apply. This tells Angular something has changed and therefore to run its digest loop. And really it's that simple. So with respect to Angular, whenever we get a callback from a function outside of Angular, just remember to wrap it in a scope.apply. Alternatively, you can use Angularized versions of the various libraries you want to use, which already take this into account and call scope.apply for you. And with respect to setTimeout in particular, there is a core Angular service called $timeout, which does all of this for you, so you don't have to call scope.apply.